I love coming back to giving a PE professional or a board member something concrete to ask or look for that would tell them to escalate this topic, that they need to have a conversation with you or and take a look and see it. One that you've said already that is clear is, do they have a value creation plan? And is it written down? Is it memorialized? Are we going back to it and checking our, do we have a plan to execute the plan?
Sure.
What are other either questions you might ask or things you might look for to say, are we doing the blocking and tackling when it comes to our strategy, our plans for growth, our plans for productivity, like you talked about?
Well, keeping in mind my own personal odyssey, when I got into private equity, it was to fix something that was causing problems and we didn't really know root cause, okay? And then through observation, we noticed some other things because I was being a 2-year-old asking why. And the reason there's a value creation roadmap is that we noticed a very likely J-curve coming out of close. So what happened? And that first quarter was typically not what it ought to be. And when we started digging in, doing the Ishikawa diagram with the root causes, we got there real fast. And it's back to something I shared earlier. Who understands the investment thesis? Who owns the investment thesis? What are the priorities for making it happen, and do they need help? 4 big questions.
Yep.
So let's assume there's a plan. And 20 years later, there tend to be plans. Wasn't the case when I got into it. But if the plan's not working, I'm going to go back to a point I made earlier, which is my favorite question. What's keeping you up at night?
Right.
Well, if they're reading the right numbers, they know something's not performing, so my revenue line's not right, or my bottom line's not right, or some point in between. So, okay, what do you think's happening? And it could be, I don't know. That's okay. Let's find it together.
Amen.
So the methodology, if it's not isolated, by the way, sometimes people, and it's happened to me too, you've got a likely suspect of what you think is wrong, but when you start digging, you find out, no, that's smoke. The fire's over here. But let's assume that you had the right things. So let's go take a look at it. And one of the ways I brand myself is, although I've got some mileage on me, I don't mind getting my hands dirty. And neither do you guys. If it means you're on the midnight shift because that's where the quality problems are,
right,
then you're on the line when it's happening because you want to feel it. You want to experience it yourself. So if it's a macro thing, I will say, let me pretend I'm in order. I want to know how I got here and the serpentine machinations to get me to collected cash. Let's follow that and let's look for stuff. And sometimes all of it needs attention, but sometimes you can find bottlenecks. And earlier in this visit, I mentioned getting platooned in on an occasion where we thought it was revenue. I said, it's something we need to work on before that. Fixed it, feeding it with revenue, no problem. If we hadn't, it would have been a different problem. So I'm going to say it's context. So are we measuring the right things? And we might not be. The truth is we might not be. I think the industry's gotten much, much better about the balanced scorecard concept. But even so, there's always room for a surprise somewhere. But if it's particularly a long cycle business, I want to know how the pipeline's managed. One of my war stories involves we weren't making the numbers chronically, and when we started looking, we had an alleged rainmaker who, when we said, well, none of these opportunities are staged, like suspect, prospect, requests for information, requests for quote, contract, billing, generic steps. Long cycle business, and lo and behold, they're big dollars. And the rainmaker refused to help us define the stages. Well, we sort of used the definition everybody else came up with and subjected it on to that person, and lo and behold, it was mostly airball. And when we had that discussion, that if we apply the same rigor to you that we do everybody else, we might have a problem here. Wouldn't cooperate. Well, you can sort of read the tea leaves for what happens, and indeed that's what happened. So the simple things sometimes, and that's what I love about what I do. The simple stuff is the best stuff. If for no other reason than more the population understands it. And if you can't connect with people who live it, you're not going anywhere. You got the best plan in the world, but if they don't get it, how can they follow something they don't understand?
Right.
And to that end, I'll tell you in my project work, especially when it's process oriented, I have a very simple rule, just a very, very simple rule. No bosses. Why? Because bosses already think they know the right answer. If they did, my phone would not have rung. I want worker bees. And here's what I know. And one of the things I learned in transitioning from GE to lower middle market private equity, at GE, you could spend a lot of time finding a needle in a haystack. Why? Because it had a lot of zeros behind it.
Sure.
And the IRR was still worthwhile. In lower middle market, if you aren't delivering something measurable in 90 days, you're doing the wrong thing. Okay?
Yep.
So
Same.
I'm a Six
Absolutely
Sigma
true.
Master Black Belt. I don't use all 15 steps.
Right.
I skip some because I can. And it's the Pareto thing. It's the 80-20 thing. So if you ask the worker bees, guess what happens? They already know what's wrong. They just haven't been enabled with air cover. Point two, they also have some pretty strong and solid ideas about how to fix it. They might not have it down to the nth degree,
Sure.
but they live it.
Go to Gemba. That's right.
So point three, and you go through some rationalization for which ones you might want to prioritize over others, but point three, this gets into the cultural bucket I was telling you about, all things people. When you engage people who do the work, nobody shows up to fail. That was a Deming principle. Nobody shows up to fail. We can set people up to fail, maybe not maliciously, but we can set people up to fail. So if I ask the people who do the work, if this is our stated problem, what do you think's wrong? There's your fishbone. See a pattern here? It's usually people and process. Usually people and process. That's the 80-20. What do you think we ought to do? Okay, let's do that in a payoff matrix. That makes sense. Let's report out and see if we can get some traction here. When you take them along for the ride, and actually they're taking me along for the ride, I'm giving a little air cover, a little coaching, but when they author the identification of root cause and the prescription for solution, they'll still do it when you go home.
Right. It's theirs. Exactly.
Because it's doing some things. It
Yeah.
makes them more successful.
Sure.
Now, hopefully, they have some incentives
Yeah.
associated with this. But again, it's people.
The
So if
vast majority of people want to do a good job.
Exactly.
So, all right.
Including me.
Yeah. I'm in that category too.